Washington's a sleeper for a 5-star tackle.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the Everydayers today. We're talking a little women's basketball at the end because shout out to them. They've got a play-in game in the first round of the NCAA tournament tonight as the Everydayers listen to this on Thursday. We're going to talk some men's basketball transfer targets because there's a couple of those starting to emerge, a couple guys we really want to get into that we're really intrigued by with the whole March Madness thing. Hey, we got to spend a couple minutes on that, right? But the majority of this show is going to be, I think, just from when we read the Everydayers comments and everything, it's the offensive line. So we're going to talk some 2026 offensive line recruiting targets, but we're going to spend this first segment here on somebody who just is the number one target, probably on Washington's board overall. And they're certainly not the favorites, but they have kept themselves in the running for a 5-star IMG tackle, Keenyi Pepe.
Yeah, this really seems like a recruitment that whether he makes a commitment between now and call it September, sure, I don't think it'll be Washington in that moment, but I think you perfectly described it. Washington seems like a school that he really is intrigued by and really is interested in, but I think it's going to come down to that like November, December period where it's like, hey, you might not get the commitment, but you might actually get the signature. Like, I just have a weird kind of gut feeling where he's going to take visits to Washington. He's going to take an official at some point. He was going to come up on the junior day. Obviously, that didn't work out for logistical reasons, not anything related to his interest, as you touched on. But you just kind of look at it. I think he's got so many other schools. I have a hard time believing Washington. We've clearly seen Washington is not going to be that school that, hey, we're going to drop a bag on you and you're going to commit just for the sake of committing, where they will actually want the signature. So it's like, hey, look, we'll play the long game with you. We're willing to wait this out. We're willing to reschedule visits and have you prioritize other things for the time being, which is exactly what you should do. And I think that'll kind of curry good favor. That's not why they did it, but I think it just kind of seems like there's a connection there where, like, some way, somehow, maybe he ends up at Washington, but it's going to be one of those long haul commitments and kind of processes, in my opinion.
So I agree with you there. It's really just kind of interesting to look at the process right now, where Miami is one of the leaders that's in there. I know USC is another big one, and they're doing a really good job on the recruiting trail right now with Lincoln Riley and that staff down there. But this is just a situation that I've been really intrigued by for a long time, because it's one of those things where, whenever you see, oh, hey, a kid from IMG is coming up, like it's always really interesting, since they are, talking about Kasani Giles last week, and that's somebody who, is good enough to play at one of the best programs in the country, and no matter where he's from. But knowing that he's a California kid originally, I think is a really important part of this, where it's, do you want to play closer to home? And if you do, hey, we've got a really great opportunity for you up here at Washington, which is another just small puzzle piece here. But I want to dive into the actual recruitment of Keenyi Pepe, where, yeah, you mentioned it. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago that he was unable to make the trip to Washington's junior day. I know our buddy Scott Eklund reported on it first that there were some conflicts where I think his parents said that they wanted him to focus on academics at that point in time, and that things were going to work out. So, Lars, I like where you're going with that. The one thing I disagree with is I believe that they can earn a commitment from him. I think that's very possible, but there are a couple of huge factors at play here. In order to do that, you got to get him up for an unofficial during spring practice. At some point, that needs to happen if you're going to stay in the running. And then, obviously, on top of that, you need to earn an official visit. Those are the two big hurdles that I think might be looking a little steep right now, since you weren't able to get him to come up for the junior day. But I still don't think it's impossible. And it's certainly going to be a long shot. I want to make sure I emphasize that as many times as possible. But the fact that his dad seems very interested on what he's been posting on social media, the fact that UW went out to IMG in full force to make sure that they got some time to talk to him, are all really important factors in this. And the fact that it wouldn't be his first unofficial visit whenever and if he does come back, since he was able to come up for the UCLA game in November of 2024, These are all things that I think will play into Washington's favor. But again, you need to make sure you get him on campus for that.
Yeah, in a way, it's almost, and you mentioned him being originally from California, so it's not the, oh, hey, we're going and getting a kid from Florida, or we're going and getting a kid from Alabama, which is a major statement, but also a different uphill climb in the sense of, Alabama is going to be lurking. Some of the other SEC schools are going to be lurking for guys that are naturally from the South. Whereas I think a kid from California, you throw Raiden Weinbread at him and say, hey, I originally lived in Arizona, went to IMG. Same thing with Sonny Giles. And that's part of the Cali wave, in my opinion, where it's a Cali extended wave, where you're obviously in Florida, but you're guys that are originally from, because Giles has been at IMG for 3 years. So it's not like he just randomly, was at Alabama for 3 years and then decided to transfer. No, he's established himself as a Florida guy, but clearly has California roots at heart. And I think those are the things where, and I don't disagree that they can get a commitment. I would just say, if I had to bet on one or the other, I'm betting on them getting the signature, right, but not necessarily the first or second commitment in so many words, where you look at like Easton Taffa and some other guys who are like, hey, we were in Washington early on. Now we're going to another school. Now we're looking at other schools. Obviously, Taffa at USC, Wassy Lobi at Stanford. I'm not saying they're like exactly the same types of situations, but it's just one where, like you mentioned his dad, where clearly the parents like Washington. I think that's always, the major. Sometimes it's the kid, and sometimes the parents like, hey, maybe we shouldn't, why would you go to Washington? Why would you do that? It's like, no, we see why you want to go to Washington. We see, and I think that's another sell of Jedd Fisch's program where you look at the parents thing, it's like, why not? Like, my kid should be in the NFL, and if you can get him there, get more power to you. And then you start unpacking kind of, it's one thing that really intrigued me about what Michael Switzer said during his, press conference when all the offensive staff was up there back in February, where he said, hey, like having played the position, 51 starts at Ball State, like Ball State might not be like, wow, it was USC or Florida or whatever, but a guy who actually played the position, something BC didn't do, worth noting. And so I think there's a different, it's not, again, that's not a knock on BC. Obviously, went to the NFL and last name Carroll, like it speaks for itself. But I think there's a different level of connection that players can have. It's like, oh wow, like hey, like he played my position, like yeah, maybe there's a lot of offensive line coaches that you necessarily wouldn't look at and think, wait, you played, or like what you're doing with the offensive line, and then boom, you're getting 3, 4 and 5 star guys every other year. And I think I'm not saying that's going to be Switzer, but I have a feeling where like he's able to connect on a different type of level with offensive line recruits, having done it, call it himself, Ben and Jedd's, call it offense in so many different ways for a long time, where I think it's a natural sell for him to say, hey, like, let me come develop you. I know how to develop linemen. I was an offensive lineman. I know how to play the position, so I understand you. Whereas Brennan was like, hey, like, I know the scheme. I can recruit you at NFL, all those sorts of things. They're both great sells, but for different reasons. And so I think that might also, play a small, not a huge role, but a small role in having like, hey, you know what? The guy that actually I could, get coached by knows what he's doing. So it's not just like I'm going for Jedd in the bag.
So last thing we want to mention here in terms of this is this 2026 class needs to be taken up a level. You and I have talked about that on the show, where Jedd and his coaching staff did a really good job building a solid foundation with the 2025 recruiting class. And now because I think they did a really good job with the offensive line class and the talents they were able to identify. And Keenyi, if you're able to secure him and secure a commitment and a signature, because, as you said, the signature is obviously the most important part of all of this. If you're able to do that, that takes your class to a whole different level. We're able to say, hey, we were able to get a 5-star. Why would you not want to come to Washington? Because now you are getting that top end talent, which is such an important part of recruiting, especially somebody like that, a 6'8", 320-pound left tackle who moves really, really well and honestly could probably burn his red shirt because he is that talented and seems that physically ready to play, which is really intriguing. And Lars, obviously, Keenyi Pepe is not necessarily the hardest talent in the world to identify, but Washington has done a spectacular job identifying talent in the 2026 class. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Game Time. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. With Game Time Picks, curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. I just checked the Game Time app, and there are amazing deals on some huge matchups coming up, like the NCAA tournament, which is right here in Seattle for the next couple of days. You want to go check those out. And with the lowest price guarantee, Game Time will credit you with 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Lars, when we were planning the show out, you and I, we jump in here, we have a chat that one day we just got to release some of the discussions we have behind the scenes. We had a fantastic chat about Justin Wilcox, but that's off topic. That's a discussion for another day. One guy that you and I both talked about and said, hey, we want to talk offensive line. We just looked at each other and we were like, Aaron Thomas. That's one guy who has set up an official visit to Washington, a 3-star tackle from down in Arizona. He got an Ohio State offer today, and you said it best. You were just like, hey, to anybody out there who's, bagging 3 stars, which is not something we do on this year program, or saying that Washington can't identify a talent, here's a perfect example of getting in on a kid early like that.
And a guy who they were in early on, but not in Brennan Carroll, at least to my knowledge. Like, they didn't offer him until Michael Switzer took the job, or at least, if anything, the interest significantly had an uptake. And you look at it and think the other schools that were worth mentioning, he's got official visits scheduled to Texas A&M June 20th, Arkansas June 13th, Minnesota May 30th, and then you got Washington April 25th. I'm assuming, ruling a bet at this point, safe, probably one of the safer bets on this program. Aaron Thomas probably also taking an official visit to Ohio State at some point. I don't know when, but I would be surprised if, especially this late in the process, Ohio State doesn't get an official visit now that they've offered. The offer coming on Wednesday when we're recording this, or Tuesday when they're recording.
Today's Wednesday. Yeah, no, you got it.
But I don't. I can remember if it was today or yesterday that you got the offer. But the point being that if Ohio State, Arkansas with Sam Pittman, and you just go down the list, PJ Fleck, who Jedd Fisch is very close with at Minnesota, of all these schools in Power 4 programs, we're talking SEC and Big Ten right now. It's like if these schools are all interested in you, I really could care less what your ranking is, because you look at it and it's also 6'7", 285, in that 6'7", 285, right on the ball. My God, you love that. But you look at that and say, it's obviously not the Keenyi Pepe size where it's like, hey, it's 6'8", 320, but for what Washington needs, because when you look at the left, let's call it left tackle, right tackle, because Drew Osborne's got a couple of years, Carver's only got 1, Max has got I think 1 or 2 left, and you just look at the kind of openings that are going to be there. There's nobody that's guaranteed going to lock down that left or even right tackle position moving forward. We got some good bets, obviously. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the cover is completely bare, but you look and say, hey, a guy that, you could have one come in and be an instant impact, or you could have a developmental guy where you maybe want to add, call it 10, 15 more pounds, get up to that 6'7", 300 mold, and then, he starts seeing the field more. That's the kind of guy that Aaron Thomas is, where, he's got all the projectability and frame, but not a guy that necessarily you would plug and play, A, because it's hard for offensive linemen to do that, but B, because then it kind of allows you to kind of continue to, try, who's the tackle that you were huge on? Why is his name escaping me? The name that's coming to my head is somebody that took the picture, the guy that you said was going to potentially play last year, the freshman.
You're talking about Justin Hilkema?
Justin Huckabee. There was somebody who real quick 30 seconds.
I thought you were talking about the 26 class. I was very confused.
No. The reason why I was struggling with that was because when he came in with the rest of the team to Oscar Airlines Arena, somebody zoomed in on his photo and said Jebediah. That's for a different discussion for a different day. The only thing that was in my head was Jebediah. But you look at him, it's like you obviously have potential candidates to tackle, but I think kind of stacking similar bodies like that is kind of what this program and kind of the offensive line mindset seems to be. Not that you don't want to go get that 5-star, but he's very much in that projectable. I could see him 18 to 24 months being in contention to start after, getting, some weight on him and things like that.
So I like where you're going with that, because I'm glad you phrased it that way, because when you started, talking about, hey, obviously the cupboard's not bare, I was thinking about Justin Hilcom. I was thinking about John Mills, some of the other guys that you brought in, Jack Schaefer being another one who I'm really high on from the 2025 class. But it's just a selling point, right? Where it's, hey, we have all these guys, these projectable, these 3-star, these 4-star prospects who we really like, and we think that potentially one day could turn into one of these starting tackles. We want you to join that mold, because then all of a sudden it's exactly what Jedd Fisch talks about all the time, right? It's a competition. It's the best player is going to play. It's going to find a way on the field. And in the Big Ten, having these huge projectable bodies like that is such an important part of that, where another guy that I think about in that light that I think is just the prototype, where I would say behind Keenyi Pepe might be one of the guys that I could make an argument for as the number one, or should be the number one tackle on Washington's board, is Dominic Harris, where we've talked about him a lot. I know we don't need to spend a whole ton of time on him, but at 6'8", 348, which is what he was listed at the Navy All-American Combine, that's somebody you need to secure. Got Auburn visit lined up, Utah, and there's I believe Arizona is the other one that he's got lined up over there. But Washington's the first school to have offered him, and that one was a Brennan Carroll offer. So shout out to him for that. And then he's somebody who I think they're making a really big push for, because in the mold of Keenyi Pepe, of Aaron Thomas, it's just getting these massive bodies that are going to add the physicality that you need in the Big Ten. And Lars, I only want to spend a minute on him, because another guy that we need to talk about, who I don't know if we've even mentioned had set up his official visit, is 4-star Sam Utu.
Another one where I think we had mentioned Utu a couple of times, but it's one where I think if you can get, because obviously he's from Orange Lutheran, so you have other guys there that, Anthony Jones, Anthony Jones, every time it's the Anthony J that gets me every single time. But you just look at it, you have to imagine that if you're able to get Jones in the boat early, that's another guy that can kind of help you, push Sam Utu along. Because Sam Utu's from Orange Lutheran, not Orange Lutheran. Oh, Orange Lutheran. Okay.
Yeah.
Brendan McKinney was the one that came out of Orange Lutheran.
Yeah.
But you look at Southern California guy that where if you don't end up getting Keenyi Pepe, let's kind of play this one out. If you don't get a former California guy, you need to make sure you get the California guys, and you need to make sure you get the West Coast guys. And we talked about where the talent along the offensive line is pretty good along the West Coast, but you don't have a ton of those 4- and 5-star guys. You have a decent amount this year, but not a massive amount. Sam Utu is one where if you can get him on campus, and the other schools might as well run through it. Texas, June 20th, USC, June 13th, SMU, May 2nd. You really flip John Mills from Texas. USC seems to be hot on the recruiting show with Chad Billman and everything that they're doing there with Chad Savage. So that might be your toughest competition. Then you got SMU, who I know you got a buddy down there. So it's one of those where it's like good school, Big 12, or no, they're in the ACC, right?
ACC.
Yeah, ACC. So stupid. But with that being said, long story short, you're still going up against premium schools. And so USC is not going to get everybody. So now that might take out one school. Now you're going against Texas. And for everything that Texas is, I could see UW winning that battle. And no shot at SMU here. But I feel like if it's SMU or UW for an offensive lineman, especially from California, I'm going to bet on UW in that respect. Sure. So you're starting to kind of, play the deductive reasoning. And anytime you can get a 4-star, just stack your 4-stars, and then you can develop a couple of 3-stars. But really the program, especially along the offensive line, you want to build it with those either 4-star caliber or actual 4-star guys in the case of Sam Utu.
So I agree with you. And at the same point, there's one distinction I think we need to make here, because it's Washington's one commit along the offensive line in the 2026 class, and that's Adeong Yang, where there's one other thing there. And it goes back to something that we haven't necessarily seen pay off just yet. And I think the coaching change has been a big part of that, is I personally am of the mind of, if you're going to take some of these mid to lower ranked, like overlooked 3-stars, I think they need to have an elite trait or two. And I think for Adeong Yang, that's his size and his physicality, where that is an elite trait. Because we saw that a couple of years ago with Sewane Fasolo and Keenyi Pepe. And again, that's why I say it hasn't played out yet, because Keenyi Pepe is at Minnesota and Sewane Fasolo struggled last year as a redshirt freshman after being thrown into action following, explosion. Let's call it that. So I think that, when I look at some of the guys we've mentioned, they all have one or two things, outside of obviously Keenyi Pepe and Sam Utu, they all have one or two things at the very least that they do very, very, very well, or just a trait about them that is, I don't want to say can't miss because that's unfair, but something that gives them higher odds of success than somebody else. And I'm just really curious to see how this class is going to play out in that light, because Lars, we talked about talent identification a minute ago. That's certainly part of this, but on top of it, it's also just, hey, I know we have to keep using this phrase because it really is what it is, but I just feel like it gets repetitive at a certain point. It's laying a foundation, and that's what happened. And if you want to take a couple of guys in that Adeong Yang mold, where I would consider Dominic Harris in that light, where it's a big physical projectable presence that might need a year to potentially even 3 to get to where he needs to be in order to play, that's okay. If you trust your own process, which clearly this coaching staff does, but if you say, hey, we like this guy because we think he's really physical and he's really strong, and after 2 years, we think that maybe he's going to be a player for us in the interior, fine, go for it. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing just to keep in mind as this class continues to shape up. And Lars, speaking of shaping up, the transfer portal opens for basketball on Monday, and a couple of targets are starting to reveal themselves for Washington. Daylight savings snuck up on us again, and if you're feeling that lost hour of sleep, 5 Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes need a little extra boost to power through. Whether you're staying up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with your busy day, 5 Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. With longer days, I love getting outside for a quick hike or a run, and Tropical Burst is my go-to for a quick boost. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. Need one now? Grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery store or convenience store. They're everywhere. Stock up and stay energized.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
So Lars, one guy that is really interesting as the men's basketball transfer portal window starts to open on Monday is somebody that Washington was named an early leader for. It's Southern Illinois guard Kennard Davis.
Yeah, it's really an intriguing one. 6'6", long, athletic, and can put up a 20-point game seemingly with ease.
Yeah.
You're not really going to turn those guys down, but it's more an intrigue of, okay, you're starting to look at the roster, and let's kind of go through what maybe they need. Where he plays, I think, you probably play the 3, maybe the 2.
I would say the 2, yeah.
Just depending on who's on the floor, because if you have Dominic Diamande, he could play. I feel like they might be slightly interchangeable because he does have a good 3-point clip. And I think you're starting to look at it. You need some shooters. You need some good help there. And somebody maybe to play off Zoom or JJ Maniquet or somebody like that, where you just give them an option where you don't have to force Cortland Muldrew into the game right away. But even though he probably will end up playing a significant amount just because I think his talent's going to preclude that or not prevent that, I should say. But with that being said, you just kind of look at him like anytime you got a decent 3-point shooter, I think that's kind of where, the strength is going to be with this offseason. Obviously, you need some front court help. But I think finding some consistent 3-point shooters seems to be mission 1 for Danny.
So I agree with you there, where I would say that I don't think that's everything in his game, obviously, but it is a big part of it. And that's really important, where another thing that you and I mentioned the last time we talked basketball on the show a few days ago was one thing that Danny told us about a just an end of clock guy, somebody who can throw up some tough shots and they're going to go in for one reason or another. We've seen, I'm not even going to mention some of the names that we've seen in previous years that have just stuck a knife through Husky fans' hearts that are in that mold of player. And I don't know if he's necessarily that guy. And I mean that with all due respect, just in terms of we look at what this roster needs. And I think he feels more than just being a good shooter. I think he's a really strong defender too, where that was something that got him on the floor a lot early in his freshman season. And then in his second year is when we really saw his offense take a step forward. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like with him. I also just kind of like because another thing that Danny told us after the Oregon game was that he's looking for length, athleticism, and fast twitch. And I think that's another thing that he provides really well, where you have that from him. You got all the length that Tyler Harris provides, and then Dominic Diamande as well in that similar mold, where somebody who can slash, where he doesn't necessarily shoot the ball as well, but is also a strong defender who can just get up the floor really quickly and just plays with that energy and that pace that you really need. So I think that he fits that mold really well. I'd be curious to see if they want to go add one more lights out sort of shooter, where somebody who can have the ball in his hands with 5 seconds to go on the clock and is going to just pull a logo three or something like that, because I don't know if he necessarily fills that need, but he is a really talented player that I'm really excited to see what would be next for him.
Well, another area that you kind of alluded to, where something Danny said after, we need guys that are tough. 64 games in 2 years. Clearly he's able to play. And I think that's availability is the best, kind of your best trait, especially for guys in college basketball in Danny's system. And so adding a guy who's consistently, been able to show up, whereas maybe it hasn't been consistent offensively, almost kind of like a better offensive version of Tyree Iheanacho. That's what Tyree came to do here. He's supposed to be that defender first, help out a little bit on the offensive side. But if nobody really mentioned where it's like, hey, Tyree put up 0-2-0-0 in terms of points. That wasn't that's why Danny didn't care, because look, your job as the defender, set the tone defensively. Like, you're our quickest guy here. You need to be the one setting the tone on defense. And then obviously it wouldn't hurt if you had some offense. And so when you look at Kennard Davis, that's kind of almost what we're talking about. Where another guy where help out on the defensive end, offer some other ones. One name I do want to throw out here, obviously not sourcing this at all, and obviously unfortunate situation with his grandfather, but Isaiah Watt. In-state kid. Do you add it? Because with the expanded roster, you could add a couple of guys. Now, no offense to Isaiah, he's not the lights-out shooter going to pull up from the logo a la Steph Curry. But I wonder, do they kick the tires at all there? Or does Isaiah just go out of state and go out to do his own thing? Which, again, both are understandable. I'm just kind of, again, given the unfortunate, passing of Slick this past week, great basketball legend in Seattle. Obviously, Donald being from Utah, there's some tie-in there. I'm just curious, would they ever kick the tires on that? Because he's not necessarily a lights-out shooter, but he's not a terrible shooter either.
No, I'm glad you mentioned him, because he was one guy that I wanted to make sure we covered. The other one who I think is probably, just in terms of their most important need right now, is Nevada's Nick Davidson, where this is a guy who I was really impressed with watching him play this year. I got the numbers right here: 15.8 points, 6.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists per game for Nevada, 37% for three-point range. And I'm just really intrigued, because I was reading the Joe Tipton tweet right there. That's why it looked a little funky, because he also just had 30 plus teams on the list of, hey, yeah, we've all reached out to this guy, because he is that good. And it's that big physical presence who can stretch the floor a little bit and can play really strong defense down low. And we saw that when, Nevada beat Washington this past season. So Danny got an up close and personal look at him. And especially after Chris Conway decided to medically retire late on Tuesday night, this just became a more important need, where let's say the front court right now stays the same, right? Just in terms of what the roster looks like today is just what's expected to be there. Where that's Frank Kepnang coming back on a medical red shirt. That's Casey Ibekwe. That's Nico Bandalo. And that's Matty Traore. Lars, that's not enough. You need more. And I think Nico Bandalo could be a truly tremendous player. I think Frank Kepnang, when healthy, could be one of the better bigs in the conference, especially defensively. And I think Matty Traore has a very high ceiling. I'm really curious to see what that looks like after dominating the junior college level this past season. But that's still not enough. And I think if you're able to add Nick Davidson, and then honestly, potentially maybe one more guy as well, just to round out that depth and just to have a little bit more just down low and that physical presence that Danny talked about, saying, hey, we didn't have that this season after a couple of injuries. I think this is the guy who could really help you with that.
Yeah, and being from the Mountain West, Danny obviously knows it well, like you mentioned. And so I think, I completely agree with your assessment. Where Frank's good, but like I said, where it's just kind of hard to count on him being your starter and having it, even with Keenyi Pepe, where given the amount of game time that he got, where it wasn't like he was, the first option every single time off the bench. He was either Wilhelm or somebody else. And to me, it was like, okay, look, what's the holdup? What's preventing Casey from getting there? So anytime you can add competition, it's a better sign. And maybe Casey is better for it. Maybe he ends up still playing just as much, and it is what it is. But you need to prevent that fall off from this past season and Matty Traore will play a significant role in that. But just you can't have that fall off where if Frank goes down again, God forbid, you can't just look at that bench and say, well, we got Matty, we're good enough. It's like, you need more than that.
So I agree with you there, where I think the one thing that Danny did mention when it came to what was really holding Keenyi Pepe back, it was the fact that he didn't stretch the floor necessarily as well, where he's not as good as a perimeter defender as some of the other guys. Or I think that's just something to mention there, where he's a really good defender. And I know he had some where he forced a steal or a block on, I think, 10% of his possessions over his second season at Oregon State. And we just didn't get to see that a lot this year, because you want to throw Wilhelm Breidenbach out there if you need somebody who's going to defend the three-point line a little bit better. And that was just not his biggest strength.
Which is fair. And I think, you just look at it again, it just gets about you're assessing the position, you're assessing the front court. And anytime you feel like you can add a better body or another body, go for it. I think that's exactly what Danny should do. And, you'd be remiss if we didn't finish off with, the ultimate goal of Danny building this back up to making the tournament.
No, absolutely. Where I could take 60 seconds on this, where Lars, I'm really excited to watch where the women's team and Coach Tina Langley, they're in Chapel Hill right now. They're getting ready to take on the Columbia Lions champions of the Ivy League. I think this is going to be a really fun matchup to watch, where they're fighting for the 11th seed and the right to play West Virginia in the second round. This game is going to come down to Washington's trio of stars. That's Elle Ledeen, that's Delia Daniels, and Savia Sellers. Elle Ledeen, obviously all Big Ten second team, while the other two were honorable mentions. And there's one particular matchup I want the everydayers to be aware of as they tune into this game on ESPN2, and that's Savia Sellers versus Kitty Henderson, who was the Ivy League Defensive Player of the Year. Just something to keep an eye on there, where Savia was second on the team in points per game, averaging a little over 15 per contest. And if Elle Ledeen, who had before the Michigan game that knocked UW out of the tournament, she had scored 20 plus points at 5 of her last 6 games. So she's going to need a little help. I think Savia Sellers could be somebody who, I believe she led, if my math was still correct, led the team at 3-point shooting percentage this past season. So just something to keep an eye on there. Make sure to keep an eye on that. And, if they win, there's going to be more right here on Locked On Huskies, just as you're going to get every single day. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.